Thank you for recording. Yes. Okay, keep putting more things in the chat. I think I will move on as you're doing that. So next slide, Christina. So as we're on computer screens, not very well rooted, we always like to take a few minutes to just put your feet on the ground and realize that you are a body living on this earth, not just a face on a computer screen. And let's all take 2 deep breaths together. And it's been our custom to also, in addition to our 2 deep breaths, well, to share a photo. I think you'll recognize this, Lake Monona with this beautiful ice. And also to take time to acknowledge that we are living on lands and around lakes that are part of the traditional territory of the Ho-Chunk people. They call these lands Dajob. And as we look at this photo of the lake with the ice, I'll share that I recently learned that the practice of ice fishing was practiced by the people living here before the Europeans arrived. When the Ho-Chunk were forcibly relocated to reservations in Iowa, Minnesota, South Dakota, and Nebraska, they were taken away from our lakes and ice fishing tradition. And some of them resisted relocation and walked, yes, walked all the way home from those other states. So that's something I may reflect on the next time I walk by and see ice fishermen on the lakes today. We can move to the next slide, Christina. And I should introduce myself. I'm sorry. I'm Julia Isaacs with 350 Madison, and I'm hosting this meeting along with Christina, who is running lots of the slides, and Marion, who will be dropping things in the chat. We form the monthly meeting team of 350 Madison. And this talk is also co-sponsored by the Madison monthly meeting of the Society, the Religious Society of Friends, also known as Quakers. So we've had our opening chat about books that we've read. We've had our welcome and land acknowledgement. In a minute, I will turn to introducing Jim Janko from Veterans for Peace for our main talk. We will then have some different updates on what's happening in climate change activism right here locally. And then around, this is 8 o'clock, it might be 8:05, somewhere in there, Jim will stay on the line for those that want to talk with him further. We also will have those who are newcomers and want to know more about 350 Madison. We'll meet with our volunteer coordinator. So that's an overview. And of course, if you're really tired at 8:05, you also might retire for the evening. Those are all good options. I think I now turn it over to, I want to introduce tonight's speaker, James Janko. He's with the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project of Veterans for Peace. He carries a concern about the effects of war on the environment, which he's carried ever since being a medic in Viet Nam. So Jim, you can bring up your slides and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you. Before I bring up the slides, I'll tell you a little bit about the history of Veterans for Peace. But first, I want to tell you I'm joining you from Albuquerque, New Mexico, the ancestral lands of the Sandia and Isleta peoples. I'm very grateful to be with you tonight. Let me give you a little history of Veterans for Peace and a little bit of my own story. Now, Veterans for Peace formed in 1985. We're a global organization of military veterans and our allies, non-veterans. And our goals are to increase awareness on the total costs of war, to seek justice for veterans and victims of war, and to one day end war altogether. Now, about my own story, I was drafted into the Vietnam War, which the Vietnamese called the American War. And I was assigned to be a medic in an infantry battalion commanded by Colonel George Armstrong Custer III. Now, as a platoon medic, I witnessed, among other things, immense destruction to this earth. My unit operated in areas where resistance forces vanished into tunnels. So if we couldn't find the Vietnamese, our so-called enemy, we called in the Air Force to destroy all that concealed or sustained the enemy. Planes bombed rice paddies, rivers, forests, fields, and defoliated huge tracts of land. We were fighting the earth itself. If we couldn't find the Vietnamese, we could, and we did, destroy their land. Now, after my time in the war, I studied ecology at UC Berkeley, and it's a long time ago, but one class, ecosystemology, I still remember pretty well. For our final exam, we were told to go out onto the campus and choose 1 square inch of earth to write about as an ecosystem. That is, to write about the relationships between organisms, about what sustained this slice of earth. I remembered as I was writing that a Cobra gunship could put a bullet in every square inch of a football field in less than 1 minute. And at the same time, I was a student. I was immersed in the complexity of life in minuscule, 1 square inch, which was part of and sustained by everything around it. Aldo Leopold, author and ecologist, wrote that land is a community is the basic concept of ecology, but that land is to be loved and respected is an extension of ethics. This goes straight to our topic. Let me see if I can share screen now. Okay. Okay. So the climate crisis and militarism project of Veterans for Peace is about 1.5 years old. And the destruction that we're seeing now due to climate change dwarfs the devastation that I witnessed in Vietnam. And the impact of our military on climate, though enormous, is seldom in the conversations about climate. And I'll tell you why. Going back to 1997, the Kyoto Protocol was the first international treaty aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Now, during negotiations, the US insisted that many of its military missions would be exempted from consideration and therefore would not be counted at all. Now, the lasting result of this has been to silence the reporting of our emissions, our military emissions, and even to silence the discussion of them. Now, COP26 happened a few months ago, the climate summit in Glasgow. There was no mention of military emissions, the emissions of any country's military. I want to give you 2 quotes. First on the left, I want you to act as if the house is on fire, because it is. Of course, this is Greta Thunberg. And on the right, you see Dwight Eisenhower. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. Now, Dwight Eisenhower made this remark in 1953. And 8 years later, in his farewell address to the nation in 1961, he coined the term military industrial complex. I quote, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Well, he had great foresight, but I doubt he could have imagined the industry of militarization, what it has come to in our time. Here's one example. The F-35, which I hope you're able to stop from coming to Madison. The F-35 project in all is expected to cost taxpayers $1.7 trillion in all. To bring this down to a human scale, $1.7 trillion would erase all student debt. It would also pay for most of the Build Back Better plan. Now, Lockheed Martin is the main developer of the F-35, and they are highly skilled at marketing their products, both nationally and internationally. In this country, components for the F-35 are made in 48 of our 50 states. So reps in Congress, they tend to all go for it, thinking, oh, jobs in my district. And another big thing, they receive campaign donations. Now, components for this plane are also made in Europe, in our allied countries, and these countries also purchase the plane. So it's an international loop. The point I want to make is that Lockheed and really all the major military contractors have inserted themselves into national and global economies. And they spend a great deal of PR money trying to convince us that these systems are indispensable, not only to global security, but to our economic well-being. And this nexus of power in money and militarism in the guise of defense, of keeping us all safe, is one of the main obstacles that, in my view, prevents us from addressing the most certain and immediate threat to our security, which is the climate crisis. Now, we have 4 areas of focus in this project. 1, reporting and reducing US military missions, opposing US militarism and supporting peace. I want to say, as a combat veteran, I have no issue with the troops. My issue is with the policies that direct their activities. Standing for climate justice, and reducing and redirecting the US military budget. Now, on the first one, we've already made some progress. We've worked with California Representative Barbara Lee, who has introduced House Resolution 767, which calls on the Department of Defense to report all greenhouse gas emissions at home and overseas. And it also calls for transparency on how the Pentagon spends our tax dollars. By the way, the Pentagon has never passed an audit. Now, there's a lot I cannot tell you about our military emissions because the data does not exist. But the data that we do have tells us that our military emits more CO2 than mid-sized nations. For example, Morocco, Peru, Sweden, Hungary, etc. In COP26 in Glasgow, nearly 200 countries participated. Now, if our military were categorized as a nation, it would rank 47th in greenhouse gas emissions. You know, just think of that, one organization emitting more CO2 than any mid-sized nation. And this is mainly just looking at fuel usage. The Department of Defense does not release official data on military emissions. So researchers need to dig a bit. The Department of Energy keeps track of the greenhouse gas emissions of military vehicles. So on that alone, just that alone, we know our military emits more CO2 than mid-sized nations. But it's far from a complete picture The entire industry of militarization has a huge carbon blueprint, and for most of it, we lack adequate data. Now, give you some examples of some major fuel usage. You can put around in your car for 7 years, and you'll use about as much fuel as the B-52 Stratofortress in a single hour. These are Blue Angels. You've probably seen them, willingly or not, and they supposedly fly for our entertainment. A show that lasts just 1 hour uses about 9,100 gallons of fuel and releases into the atmosphere as much CO2 as a car being driven approximately 145,000 miles. So 1 hour of entertainment. So let's look at one of our wars, shock and awe. Operation Iraqi Liberation was what they initially wanted to call it. Someone realized that the acronym OIL would spell oil, so they found another noun, freedom. Now, more than 1 million American troops have been deployed to Iraq from 2003, when the war began, through 2020. And this does not include the tens of thousands of private contractors. You know, the international community did not want that war, but eventually 37 countries fought beside us. You know, imagine the supply lines to service operations. General John Abizaid, who was the central commander in charge of Iraq when the war began, said of the war, "Of course, it's about oil. We can't really deny that." General David Petraeus, who had key leadership roles both in the Iraq war and the Afghan war, was even more blunt. He said, "Energy is the lifeblood of our warfighting capabilities." War games. On the left side of the screen, you see the Philippines, on the right, Norway. They happen all over the planet. They're not something new, but of course, with the situation in Ukraine, they are especially alarming. I think it's important to note that NATO's ballistic missiles were pointed at Russia long before the Russian troop buildup on the Ukrainian border. Now, I have no sympathy whatsoever for Vladimir Putin, but I'm sincerely hoping for de-escalation, diplomacy, before this goes down a very dangerous rabbit hole. In terms of greenhouse gases, I want to point out 2 things. These war games release huge amounts of greenhouse gases, and they also cause large-scale harm to ecosystems on land and sea. You know, in a war like the one that I was in, the military blows stuff up. And in preparing for war, it's the same thing. They blow stuff up. One example, in June of 2021, the Navy set off a massive explosion, detonating a 40,000-pound bomb in the Atlantic Ocean. This was to test whether a new aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald Ford, was ready for combat. It was called a full ship shock trial, one of 3 detonations planned. The blast registered as a 3.9 magnitude earthquake on the Florida coastline, 100 miles away. And each year, the Navy sets off thousands of explosives. So how is this related to the climate crisis? Well, the Earth's oxygen supply is linked to the health of our oceans. And the oceans provide more than half of our oxygen. Phytoplankton are microscopic plants that absorb carbon. through photosynthesis, and they generate oxygen. They actually do more for a planet than rainforests in terms of being the lungs of the planet. They are also the base of the food chain of all marine ecosystems. So imagine when you have a blast that has a radius going out 100 miles in every direction, how much phytoplankton was destroyed. Okay, these are, the lungs of our planet. I don't have time to talk about it now, but the relationship between phytoplankton, some of the smallest organisms, and whales, the largest, is really fascinating and beautiful. And maybe in the discussion, we can get to some of that. I want to give you a glimpse of our military reach. We have bases all over the world, more than 750 in 80 countries. So our troops, our planes, ships, tanks are all over the planet. And it takes almost 20 million gallons of fuel each day to supply the needs of the US military. Jets are the biggest users. For example, the F-35A, there are three types of F-35s. To go a single mile, it needs almost 2.4 gallons of fuel. And by the way, these bases, we don't know their emissions. Some are small, some are the size of cities with the infrastructure of cities. We don't know their emissions. Now let's look at our priorities. In the past couple of decades, we've spent 21 trillion on war. How much would it cost to shift to renewables, the power grid? The estimate is 4.5 trillion over one decade. So our response to 9/11 has militarized so much of our domestic and foreign policies that we failed to meet the most critical challenges, especially failed in addressing the climate crisis. Other areas where this money could have been spent, just 200 billion would provide free preschool for 3- and 4-year-olds for a decade and raise teachers' pay. 449 billion would continue the child tax credit for 10 years. The cost of one F-35A would pay the rent for 1 year for about 73,000 people facing eviction. And I want to point out that more than 7 trillion of this, more than a third of this, went directly to military contractors. So if I had to declare a winner in the war on terror, I would say the contractors have done it. So here's President Biden's budget proposal. This is a very busy chart. Don't get lost in the details. There's too much data here. If you just look at the blue portion of the pie, you will see our national priorities. President Biden asked for more military spending than what Trump asked for, and Congress actually gave him more than he requested. Both major parties routinely approve the National Defense Authorization Act with little meaningful discussion. And many expenses related to the military are omitted. For example, nuclear weapons. You'd expect that to be under military. No, that's under the Department of Energy. Then there's Homeland Security, intelligence agencies, border security. None of that mentioned under the military here. If you add that all up, it comes to about 1.25 trillion for a single year. I again want to point out the Pentagon has yet to pass an audit. I'm sure the people that are trying to bring the F-35s to Madison are telling you it's going to be great for the economy. And that simply is not true. This study out of Brown University shows that the military is an overall drag on the economy. Yes, they do provide some jobs, but take a look at other sectors which are far better at creating jobs. Look at education, look at healthcare. Look at, if you put wind and solar in clean energy, if you combine those, look how they perform in terms of creating jobs that we actually need. Now, I want to briefly go over what we're doing in this project, House Resolution 767. I've talked about already, and in a moment, I'll tell you how you can help us with that. We have a great website, a ton of resources, which I hope you'll check out. Gary Butterfield has probably put that in the chat already. We're doing these slideshow presentations, and if you can refer us to any group, peace group, social justice group, church group, as veterans, we feel like we understand the military's impact on climate, and we would like to share our understanding with as many as possible. Now, to support the congressional resolution, it's really simple. You can go to our website. I am not in the least bit tech savvy. It took me less than a minute to send a message to my rep. And you can schedule a presentation and you can view our resources. I want to close with a couple of quotes. We're stronger together. I've given you a lot of difficult information. I want to close on a note of hope and solidarity. I feel like we're caught in this old paradigm. The idea if we spend the bulk of our nation's wealth and resources on the military, we keep adding to our arsenal, we'll be safe and secure. Well, we spend far more on the military than any other nation, and we have yet to address the most serious threat to our security, the climate crisis. I want to close by quoting Winona LaDuke, a Native American on the White Earth Reservation in Minnesota. She says, "The reality is that we have the financial and technical resources to save Mother Earth. It is just that they are not being brought to bear in the right ways, in the direction of protecting the planet and stopping global climate destabilization. In short, Earth restoration efforts are critical to world security. We have an enormous opportunity to establish a 21st century Marshall Plan for the green economy as a matter of homeland security." And one last quote, one sentence from Joanna Bland: "When nothing is sacred, nothing is safe." Thank you so much for listening. Now we can open it up to Q&A and discussion. I'd love to hear your voices. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jim. I'll give people a moment to, if they have and if you'd rather, raise your hand and say it out loud, you can give your question that way, but otherwise put it in the chat.
Looks like Kent has a question.
Yeah, no, I'm just wondering if the speaker could go back on a few of those slides to kind of give us a minute to write down the equivalent, like the F-35 fuel use, the B-52 1 hour, 7 years of car use. Is there any chance to go back on those slides and just spend a little more time on those?
I can tell you that the F-35A, I know that by heart. It uses 2.37 gallons of fuel to go a single mile, 2.37 to go a single mile. There are 3 types of F-35s. I think the others use more fuel. They go faster. The F-35 has a top speed of 1,999 miles per hour. So you can imagine, in a few minutes, how much fuel it is going through. And the other one, the B-52 Stratofortress, you can put around in your car for 7 years, and you'll use as much fuel as that B-52 Stratofortress uses in a single hour.
And the Blue Angels, do you remember that?
Yeah, okay, a show, in a team of Blue Angels, they're usually 6. They fly in teams of 6. And if a show lasts 1 hour, 9,100 gallons of fuel. And it releases about as much CO2 in the atmosphere as a car being driven approximately 145,000 miles.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for your question. I will say we'll put up the audio recording on our website, the video, the recording. Any other? I see lots of thanks in the
There's
chat.
a question about if there's any more information about PFAS and the military.
You know, we usually talk about that. Yeah, definitely. You know, we have one of our slides goes to that. You know, in a longer presentation, I cover it. But yeah, you know, there are about 1,300 EPA Superfund sites that require long-term cleanup of hazardous materials. 900 of those are former or current US military bases. And many of them have PFAS contamination. They're opening up studies at 700 bases now to check for PFAS contamination. So that number of 900, which I just gave you, is inevitably going to grow. Here in New Mexico, it's a huge problem. Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico, there's a dairy farm a few miles outside of it that's been operating for 30 years, and it got totally wiped out by PFAS. They can't sell the milk, they can't do anything with the cows. And what happened was the state ordered the military, the Air Force, to clean it up. And the Air Force turned around and sued the state, saying, you don't have the authority to tell us what to do. So they're acting with impunity. But now finally they are being called on that. And it looks like at least that dairy farmer is going to get some compensation. But everybody within a 4-mile radius of that base has to drink bottled water. You know, so PFAS is a huge thing.
Gary, did you want to chime in there?
Thank you. Yeah. One of the primary PFAS are prevalent in our society. They started with Teflon from DuPont back in 1938. It's in a variety of consumer products, from Teflon coated pans to dental floss. But the danger is that PFAS, particularly two major ones, don't biodegrade readily, and they call them forever chemicals. One of the primary components that produces PFAS contamination is in the aqueous filling foam for firefighting for jets. And military bases have routinely used PFAS-laden foam to put out their fires. It's the best thing to put out these fires. But they use it in training. In San Diego, where we have a big naval and marine presence, they have dug pits and ignited jet fuel fires to practice putting them out. And then the PFAS-laden contaminants go off into the bay or into the sewer. And that's what's happened around various Air Force bases around the country. With the change in political leadership this past year, the EPA has gotten more active, and they're on the verge of labeling two of these key PFAS components as hazardous materials, which will qualify them to be placed under Superfund status for cleanup. I mean, PFAS have been on the cover of Consumer Reports in talking about drinking water. We're concerned with it because of its prevalence around Air Force bases and naval air facilities as well. But certainly if the F-35s, you know, ratchet up the number of planes or the number of operations they have, that's going to be a factor that needs to be considered.
Thank you. I see a bunch of good questions in the chat. And I also see Bradley, who's from our local Veterans for Peace, wants to jump in. Bradley, I'll give you the last word, and then the good questions in the chat we can maybe get to in the breakout session. Go ahead, Bradley.
So thank you for having this. Thank you, James. This is a lot of good information. Like she said, I'm with the local Veterans for Peace Madison. I also have worked with Safe Skies Clean Water Wisconsin for a couple of years now. One thing that I found interesting was that they're bringing these 20 F-35s here, and that will add the same thing as bringing like an additional 2,400 cars as far as like the CO2 and pollution. And they're also expanding the airport here. So the people in power are doing the exact opposite of what would help us with any sort of climate change, climate disaster. I think part of the PFAS foam is that it drains down and goes into our water system. And one of the things that DuPont found in their research is you don't want this stuff going directly into the water. So when I hear people talk about, well, you know, your Teflon pan, the little like flakes off the Teflon pan are nothing like a hanger filled up with PFAS foam. I just think this foam is a lot more poison. And I wanted to point out too that DuPont, 3M, and the Navy have all had research over the years, starting in the 1960s and 70s, and they knew that this was poison, and they hid it from the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Could I
So-
respond to I see a question on the chat that I would like to respond to. Do I, or
Yeah,
do we have to move on?
Really quickly, Jim, a quick response, and then we're gonna have time for more Q&A. But why don't you give a quick response? That would be great.
Okay, yeah, somebody asked about, is the military concerned about how climate change will affect global political and social structures? And the short answer is yes, they've never denied climate change, and they're quietly preparing to turn victims of climate change into adversaries that need to be kept out by force if necessary. And they're worried about mass migrations of people over the most basic things, food and water. So yeah, that's usually something that we cover, but in a short presentation I couldn't. So let's move on. Onward, thank you.
And thank you, Jim, for doing a short version of your presentation so we could have some Q&A now in the large group, and then we will take those questions and more, and it'll be a smaller group that can meet and talk with you directly after the main part of our meeting is over. Christina, could you bring up the slides? And I think we're going to start with a video. We have a series of things that different folks from 350 Madison want to share, our different teams, announcements, and activities. Marion, do you want to introduce the video?
Yes, my name is Marion Friedel, and I am co-lead of the climate justice team here at 350 Madison. This is a 3-minute video, very short. It's not about Wisconsin, but it was a story on CNN. And we on our team just want to help us keep climate justice and the issues involved in our minds. And so we're going to show this very brief video for you all to enjoy.
About climate justice.
Can folks hear? I know it's probably a little soft, but
I can hear.
okay.
Yeah.
The term climate justice evolved from the concept of environmental justice, emerging in the discourse in the 1980s. Environmental justice conceptualized the unjust disposal of toxic waste in predominantly Black American areas in the United States. The aim of the movement was to rethink environmental issues as social issues by ensuring that ethnic minorities and low economic sectors of the population were not disproportionately affected by adverse environmental impacts or hazards. This was done by applying principles of social justice and human rights, such as every individual has dignity, the elimination of inequity, establishing environments that are supportive of all people. In time, the environmental justice movement moved beyond the toxic waste to include the impact of climate change, giving rise to what we know today as climate justice. Climate justice considers the way in which the climate crisis disproportionately impacts marginalized community. Climate justice is a human-centered approach to climate activism that takes into consideration the common factor that ties the climate movement to other worldwide movements such as workers' rights, racial justice, gender equality, indigenous sovereignty, and many more. 3 easy ways to break down the discourse on climate justice. 1. Recognizing that at the global level, those who are the least responsible for climate change suffer its gravest consequences. 2. At the community level, marginalized groups are typically the most exposed and vulnerable to the effect of climate change. 3. The generation level. The idea that present generation have certain duty towards future generation, framing the refusal of young people today to allow for more inaction from people in power. Now, think about some inequalities and injustice that you are aware of in your life, your community, the global community. Think how these inequalities will be exacerbated by climate change. Whatever reason you come up with is exactly why climate action is not enough. We must demand equitable, fair, inclusive solution to the climate crisis. And that is what climate justice is all about.
Thank you, Christina. And climate justice. We have a separate team, but it also infuses all the work we do. We're going to now hear from some of our other teams. I'm going to start with the Community Climate Solutions team. Julia? Oops.
Actually, it's Susan. Julia, Kermit and I are going to be talking because Julia is not available this evening. So,
You have
Pardon?
Okay, Julia said you would do it in 2 minutes.
Okay. Well, we just want to announce that we have 2 reports. Many of you may be already aware of our Green Building Incentives Programs report, which is focusing on why we need to use incentives at the government level across the state of Wisconsin, because our state legislature has prevented municipalities from increasing the low building standards that the state has passed. From municipalities cannot exceed those low state levels, and so therefore we're left with using incentives. That's what that report is about. The other report, which is about financial strategies for Madison version of the Portland Clean Energy Fund. I'm not going to say a lot about that other than to say that the incentive for that report came from 350 Madison's monthly public meeting presentation by Indy Namfun, who is a coalition manager for 350 Madison Portland, 350 Portland. And we are hoping that we can move towards something similar to that by using alternative financial strategies than what was available to Portland. So that's what that report is about. Okay, next slide. This is just to announce that the Community Climate Solutions monthly meeting, which occurs on the third Thursday of the month, this month it will be the 17th from 5 to 6 p.m. Our topic we think is of sufficient interest that we wanted to let folks across 350 Madison know. We're going to be discussing Saul Griffith's new book called Electrify. If you can't get a hold of and read the book, there are a couple of really good podcasts that feature Saul Griffith that you can find in the 350 Madison update. One is the Climate Pod, and the other podcast is Rewiring America. And for the next slide, I'm going to turn to Kermit.
Hello. Yes, just putting in a plug for a fabulous event, Green Your Routine with Beneficial Electrification. It's going to be tomorrow at 6:30. You can still register up until even the last minute, but register now if you want. It's going to feature one CCST alumnus, Kathy Kuntz, who's now director of the Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change. And of course, our own Susan Miller, who's still a co-lead, and myself as the facilitator. It looks to be a very informative event, and I encourage folks who want to learn more about how they can green up their home and their life routines and electrify their homes. Show up. I popped a link into the chat. That link takes you directly to the event registration page, and hope to see you there.
Thank you, Kermit, and thank you, Susan. I'm going to ask for the next slide, which I believe Phyllis will be discussing from our tar sands team.
Thank you so much. Yes, on February 2nd, we had a great turnout to the Department of Natural Resources 10-hour virtual hearing. And this was on Enbridge Line 5, which they are trying to go around the Bad River Reservation because Bad River has told them to get off. And we are opposing either keeping it on Bad River or making a reroute around it because it is so very dangerous, especially to the Great Lakes. At that place, it's very dangerous to Lake Superior because it's not far away at all, and all the streams run northward into Lake Superior. So if there was a spill, it would get into Lake Superior, as well as destroying the Copper Falls State Park and the Kakagan sloughs, which have wild rice in them. And of course, then in Michigan, it could pollute both Lakes Michigan and Huron as it goes through the Straits of Mackinac. So we had a great turnout. 147 people spoke against and only 20 spoke for, so that's 88% on our side. We got great testimony and quotes to use. Here's one of them from Bad River Band Chairman Mike Wiggins. All 20 said the same thing, different variations of the people who were for the pipeline. And they had obviously just read the talking points of Enbridge, and then Mike Wiggins replied to them because they said, we're honoring the request by the band to leave, so we're doing it. And he said, the only thing we've ever asked of the oil company is to get out of our water, and that has been ignored and rejected because it is still, this reroute is still in the watershed, so it doesn't make anything any better. So I want to say thank you to the phone bankers who alerted hundreds of supporters. Thanks to all who attended and testified. And we can go to the next one. How you can help maintain our momentum. Submit your comment to the DNR by March 18th at tinyurl.com/takeactiononline5. We have all the materials you would possibly need to write a really good comment. You can also use some of that prose that you write and turn it into a letter to the editor for any Wisconsin newspaper or online news site. You can please sign up to Phone Bank supporters for more comments. So far, I know Sierra Club has gotten 900 comments in. I don't have the count from our action page. And then of course, there's a whole lot more coming in from other places, but we do have a goal of 2,000. So we need to keep on working. You can create social media graphics from those quotes that we got, like I did on the previous slide, but you could do a lot better than I did, I'm sure. So be sure and contact me if you want to do some graphic artwork. You can attend our comment writing party. Also, it's a silly hat party on February 16th at 7 p.m. And you can register there at tinyurl.com/waterloveletters, because these are love letters to the water that we're going to write. You can also join our team. And to volunteer, contact me, phyllis.hasbrook@350madison.org. Thank you so much. And now I'm doing the next one too, right? Go ahead.
Yes, yes, I just
So-
want to say thank you, Phyllis, and that anyone that you can write her to join the team, but also newcomers can stay on at the end, and Nikki will help connect you with different teams. But go
And
ahead,
I'll-
Phyllis, sorry.
Yes, and so then this is another very important thing that the state legislature passed on party lines, the riot bill. And so the only way to stop it now is for Governor Evers to veto it. And it is a terrible bill, Senate Bill 296. And it creates wide, elastic new definitions of what a riot is, including things that we've been involved in, could be called a riot under certain circumstances. And it has very harsh new penalties for rioting. So like 9 months in jail, for instance. So please contact him. We have the email here, eversinfo@wisconsin.gov, or his phone, 608-266-1212, and tell him to veto the riot bill. And as you can see, this nice graphic here that was made by the ACLU of Wisconsin, and we're in a temporary coalition with them and other groups. We have 35 groups who have already signed on to a letter, and we're going to send it out again to them and see if we get some more, and then send it on to the governor, urging him to veto this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phyllis. I've responded to all your action things and appreciate your making it so easy for people to do the talking points and encourage people to do it. Russ, I think we're on to you.
Sure. Can you hear me all right? Can you
Yes.
hear me? Great. So I've been, the Art Collective for 350 is going to be meeting this Thursday. We're still sorting through priorities, but one of the things that I anticipate us doing is this project that 14 cities in Wisconsin are doing called March 4th to Earth Day. And I just wanted people to be able to get it on their calendars that at 5 o'clock on 8 Fridays leading up to Earth Day, we're going to be having some kind of events going on in town. You can see if we put this in the chat so that people can actually click on those later, you can get the updates and like the Facebook page. Right now, it looks like it's actually going to be sort of a statewide thing with lots of different organizations, including 350 Madison endorsing it. The Art Collective has a sort of an ongoing sub-theme of joyous rebellion. So we're hoping to have these events have a lot of fun connected to them and have people really be attracted to the concept. We're still working on what we might pull off for Earth Day. Thanks.
Thanks, Russ. That's great. We did put those links. Marion has put a lot of those links in the chat. And so hopefully you can find the links there. I think we have another announcement with John. Do you want to make this announcement?
Gladly. So yeah, I'm really pleased to let folks know that the Wisconsin Academy of Sciences, Arts, and Letters reached out to us, hearing a bit about our arts collective. They were really interested in how 350 Madison is doing climate work through engaging people through the arts, through dance and visual arts and et cetera. And so we're really excited that next Wednesday on the 16th, February 16th at lunchtime and starting at noon, Russ Bennett and Diane Brakarsh are going to lead a presentation and a conversation about the work of the Arts Collective. So
I think it'll be really exciting and interesting. It's an important topic. I think that's a very unique aspect of 350 Madison. So I will drop the registration link in the chat, and please come and join us for what should be a great hour of presentation and conversation. Thank you.
And for those that are newer to 350, go back 1 second. For those who are newer to 350 Madison, that is an example of our artwork. You might see different critters that live in the water that would be endangered by Line 5. I
believe that's Russ under the painted turtle in the foreground. So.
Okay. I was a little surprised I didn't see the slide for the Divest and Defund, but we'll make an announcement if the slide got lost, but let's do the next slide.
All right, so hello everyone, I'm Nikki. I'm a volunteer coordinator for 350 Madison, and I am here to announce our volunteer of the month this month is Noemi. So Noemi couldn't be here this evening, but Noemi is an incredibly impressive young woman who primarily volunteers with our community climate solutions team. And she is a senior in high school, but has been volunteering with us for a while. She helped spur our podcast that we have going, and is also currently working with the Dane County Community Working Group within CCST to, let's see, it's very impressive here. So she is, I have my list here. There we go. She's doing a citizen science project to measure the CO2 captured in her community garden soil. So working with community working groups. She also has her own group called In Pursuit of Sunshine. So she works with a number of other youth groups as well. So she is doing a lot to fight climate change right now, a huge amount. And she is actually currently writing a class to teach about climate change within high school for other high school students. So you name it, and she's probably working on it. So Noemi, thank you so much for all the work you do. We're really impressed by everything that you have accomplished and everything that you will accomplish as you move forward in your climate activism.
Thank you, Nikki. And those who are new, hang on when we adjourn, and Nikki will tell you more about the different, she's our volunteer coordinator, about our different opportunities. So here's my announcement. Last but not least announcement, the Divest and Defund team, which we hear from, you haven't heard from before this evening. Oh, Seth, I don't think Seth, let me know if you want to do something else after this. But the Divest and Defund team works on trying to get Chase Bank to stop funding pipelines and fossil fuels. And their next meeting is February 21st at 7 p.m. And you can write to divest.defund@350madison.org. Sorry, I didn't put that in the slide or the chat. Seth, that's all we're announcing tonight. Is that right?
There's one more thing, Julia. Just want to encourage everyone on this call to give yourself a treat this Valentine's Day and the weekend before Valentine's Day. The team is putting together a series of social media posts on our Instagram page, our Facebook page, from our most recent action on the square. We object to the marriage between Chase Bank and tar sands oil spills. And they should be not only entertaining, and we know many of you visit our Facebook and Instagram pages anyway, but many of these posts will also be putting out that link that you saw earlier on the Stop Line 5 action page. And so the more that you share them, the more that we can spread the word and try and up those numbers of comments. But all around, they should be really fun to look at. It's basically like a horrific wedding photo album. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you, Seth. I'm looking forward to that. I love seeing you as I love seeing that street theater, and I can't wait to see the Facebook memes. Next slide. So we're wrapping up here. We do meet most every first Monday of the month. And a month from today, we'll be talking about how you talk to people about the climate crisis. And now before we move into the breakout extra Q&A, we have a poll for you to help us get feedback about our monthly meeting. Do you want to pull that up?
So I think it should be showing people who are hosts or co-hosts can't vote. So that's you, Julia, Marion, and maybe a couple other 350 Madison people who snuck in there. So hopefully this popped up on everyone's screens. These are just some questions to get a sense for what you got out of the meeting, what was really impactful to you as we plan future monthly meeting topics and formats. Marion, you can probably stop recording.